All right. Hello, hello. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time of day you are choosing to watch this set of videos. So if you're watching this for the environmental science class, just some reminders here while, kind of at the start of this. We are very, very quickly approaching the end of the semester, which means that my late due date for any late work is also very quickly approaching. So if you're behind on any assignments, try to chip away at those, get those turned in as best as you can. At some point, it's going to be like some points are better than no points. So if you're just kind of partially completing some of the discussion boards or partially completing some of the assignments, that might be good just to get things turned in so you can focus in on other things. So I know that my late deadline is very, very lenient, but it's very strict once we get to that point. So if you're watching this for the spring 2024 semester, that will be Sunday, May 19th at 11:59 p.m. sharp. No excuses, no extensions, none of that. I'm very, very lenient throughout the rest of the semester, but that's where I really put my foot down. If you have any questions on any assignments from earlier on in the semester, maybe you're like, oh gosh, that was so long ago, I don't, she's going to think whatever if I'm trying to ask for help for something that happened a long time ago. That's not the case at all. I would rather you still ask questions so you're understanding the content and then turning things in and going from there. So just keeping those things in mind. Please reach out if you need help. Come to office hours or anything like that. Not a lot of folks have been coming to office hours, actually. In fact, I don't think anyone from this class has come to office hours yet. So anyways, also keep in mind that your field trip report is also due in a couple of weeks. So hopefully you've done one of the options that are in there. So there's that. And I think that's all in terms of overall announcements. Now on to the actual material for this week. So this week we're jumping into chapter 9 and modules 1 and 2. We're covering 2 modules this week, so that is a slight, kind of, I don't want to say double the work, but just a little bit more on there. But the assignments themselves shouldn't be too taxing or too time consuming. So, and they're built that way for a reason. But what we're going to be talking about is fossil fuels. Starting with coal and then diving into oil and natural gas. So your assignments this week I actually think are pretty cool. I hope that you enjoy them as much as I enjoyed creating them. And yeah, so let's get into it. And then we're not going to get to alternatives until that's going to be our very last module. But we're going to first consider just straight up our uses of energy and how in tarnation did we get there. So starting with all this information. The picture here on the left is actually chosen also for a reason. This is an oil spill on the top of a waterway. But we'll get to all the environmental harms of these things when we get there. All right, so we first must define fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are defined as a non-renewable carbon-based resource that were formed over millions and millions of years and are made of the remains of dead organisms. So when we consider fossil fuel, we're going to consider coal, oil or petroleum, and natural gas. Let's see if this clip here works. Okay, perfect.
Before we start, where are the rest of us?
They died a long time ago, way before us. We didn't see nothing.
But surely our ancestors must have left some evidence behind. Why is he nervous?
Because, you're dinosaurs? It's weird. Thought you were dead.
Moving on, we quote dinosaurs.
So, just a funny little clip there. If you're not familiar with Rick and Morty, it's a very funny but extraordinarily inappropriate show, but it's very funny if you're into like sci-fi adult cartoon things. Anyway, so the point being is we make our stuff out of basically old dead dinosaurs. Or these things are made from generally old dead dinosaurs, which is why we also call them fossil fuels, right? Kind of giving that idea that it's from things that were a very long time ago, right? And I just want to emphasize the fact that we're calling these non-renewables because we are using resources at a much, much, much faster rate than how they're being generated. Coal that we're using now were made from swamps 200 million years ago. So that's why we're considering them non-renewable. So I want to jump into how coal is made and kind of get into the nitty-gritty details of this idea and like why it takes so long. So 300 million years ago, around there, some areas of the planet were covered with these very large swampy forests, or tropical swamps is a way you can think about that, or other types of wetlands. And so as that vegetation died and was then actually submerged into very oxygen-poor sediments within the swamps, and so with very, very low oxygen amounts, you can't have decomposition, or the decomposers can't really exist well, right? Because every living thing on Earth needs oxygen. So because of that, this sort of peat-like substance was created, and then over really, 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 really long time periods, as the peats and the lands kind of are impacted by pressure because of more sediment laid down on top of it. Heat also gets involved in this as well. So then it turns into this softer coal, which is called lignite. And then further on, it then gets into harder varieties of coal of, I'm going to totally say this wrong, but bituminous and anthracite. Here's a really cool graphic kind of showing these stages of formation. If you're someone who's into geology or rocks, I think this is a really neat graphic. But just really going from that peat-like substance, when adding in heat and pressure, then turns it into a brown coal. More heat and pressure can turn it into a softer coal, and more heat and pressure can turn it into a harder coal. This harder coal is really, really desirable because it has a really high heat content, meaning that it takes a lot of energy to change its heat, much like water. And a lower sulfur content. So it's a cleaner burning coal, if that makes sense. So this isn't something that happens overnight. For some of us, it's really hard to grasp the concept of really, really long geological time periods because our part on this earth is so tiny. But yeah, so like millions and millions of years to create coal. So I encourage you to maybe pause the video and kind of compare and contrast these different types of coal, considering the different sulfur and heat content within that. Also, by the way, if you're hearing this word peat and you're like, oh my gosh, like where else have I heard about peat or peat content? If you're someone who enjoys Scotch, different Scotches will have a flavor profile of like a peatiness to it. Personally, I prefer like that kind of peaty, kind of earthy sort of tone if I'm going to be enjoying a Scotch. Okay, so here is a map showing the coal fields across the contiguous United States with the key down here. So I encourage you to give this video a pause and kind of investigate this map a little bit and see what we're where the most coal deposits are. If you notice though, like a big thing that pops out is that the United States mostly has lignite and bituminous coal, rather than that higher energy, cleaner burning anthracite. So not great that we have those, but we're taking advantage of those kinds, specifically in one particular region, but we'll talk more on that later. Also notice how it's kind of like broken down into various regions. Notice where some places maybe don't have a lot of coal reserves, some places have a lot more than others and different types. So just kind of interesting, I think. But if we look at the global stage and looking like where we see these major coal deposits around the world, I want you to notice kind of the distribution around the world, which regions seemingly have a higher content of coal around the world, which regions seemingly don't have a whole lot of coal, or it just hasn't been found yet. So what do you observe here? What do you see? Pause the video and kind of think about this for a second. So this uneven distribution, as you can see, it's not clear, like it's not evenly distributed around the world. That's a big thing that we can take away from this. But think about that and think about industrialized areas. So think of, the US and Europe versus China and India, for example. And like, okay, well, who industrialized first and who is still industrializing folks are those in China and India, where they don't have rich coal deposits, right? So they're just now kind of diving into this stage. Also, you may be thinking to yourself, Mallory, a little bit ago, you just said that coal is from tropical swamps. These areas are not tropical swamps. So this is where we critically think and remind ourselves that our planet did not look like this geographically 200, 300 million years ago. 200 to 300 million years ago, the United States was more likely than not located over the equator, which makes for a very nice environment for beautiful tropical swamps. So, last thing I want to mention here is that the U.S. has the majority, about 28% of the world's coal reserves, which was a blessing. And now it's more of a curse, unfortunately. And the reason that it's a little bit more of a curse is due to how much CO2 emissions come from coal. So this is from a website. The source is linked on the slides, but it's a really neat website that you're actually going to use and peruse around a little bit for one of your assignments. But what I want you to consider, we're looking at the CO2 factors, so things that we're burning that create CO2, and just there's different metrics or different ways that you can measure CO2 emissions, and you can tell just by looking at this graphic that all types of coal create the most CO2 compared to some of our other energy creating gases. So not great. In that sense. And of course, in the US, coal is very, very cheap to extract and to use monetarily. And monetarily is the big question there, right? Money. But, we have external costs that are not generally considered, right? When we're thinking about, it costs $5 for this, but if you recall back to our definition of external costs, it's kind of going back to, this is something not factored in when we're considering the price of a good or a service. So these are just a few external costs of coal. There's certainly more out there, but I do just want to point out the destruction of mountains. So they'll basically blow off mountaintops to have easier access to coal. But if you blow off those mountains and you take away trees and plants that have roots, then you're going to have more flooding events, higher erosion, and landslides. That also severely decreases air quality, which can lead to serious health impacts like birth defects, higher rates of cancer, heart and lung disorders, etc. There's also, within this process, toxic substances leaching into the groundwater, which, if you recall, we drink groundwater. So not great. And also, of course, decreasing biodiversity in streams and forests by taking away or making the environments more toxic. Animals can't live there. So you're decreasing that amount, which, as we know, is not great for ecosystems and ecosystem health. And then, of course, when burned for energy, causes further environmental and health issues. A study from Harvard gave a total external cost estimated to be between $300 and $500 billion, I believe, a year. So where is all of this going? What I want to point out here is, just real quick, I encourage you to pause this video. This won't be the first time we're looking at this, but I encourage you to give it a pause and kind of see where everything goes. And this was through our energy consumption by source and sector for the year 2022. So these factors are likely to kind of adjust and change a little bit. But what this really highlights, that each of our energy sources has different uses. It's not simply interchangeable. So like seeing where petroleum goes into versus natural gas or even electric. Nuclear, while great, notice that nuclear is just going into generating electricity, for example. So nuclear will not get us off our petroleum addiction because of just what sector nuclear goes into, right? So nuclear does not help power transportation necessarily, or a very small percentage of it, right? So that's just something to really consider there. And I will also mention that coal use has decreased a lot. In 2015, from another professor's resources, that showed that coal use was at about 16% in 2015, and now it's about 10%. So it's really, really decreasing, which is nice. These are some figures from your book, so I encourage you to either go into the book and kind of dissect this. How do we go from coal to electricity? It's a really, really interesting process, so I encourage you to take some time to dissect this idea. And then where, this is also by 2018, so again, kind of going into electricity generation in particular, not just the uses of coal from the previous slide. And last thing, in terms of coal, I want you to notice here, this is a graphic showing the U.S. energy consumption, just looking at natural gas in blue, and this orange color is coal. So notice a pretty stark decrease in coal use since really about 2014, 2015, or arguably even earlier. So we have newer technologies that help extract natural gas more efficiently and for a cheaper price, both monetarily and environmentally, roughly. And so the consumption of coal has decreased. And also just anything to get us off coal is a good thing. So this is also a very interesting conversation in terms of or it's been an interesting conversation in the presidential situations because coal miners, need jobs, but if coal use is decreasing, then you're taking away their jobs, that kind of thing. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? But there are initiatives that are put out there that can help transition these folks from coal mining to a different industry or a similar industry, but for a different resource. So I encourage you to look further into that. Actually, one of your assignments this week is to kind of poke into that a little bit. So I'm curious to see what you all have to say. And this week's assignment, by the way, one of the assignments will get you to investigate coal and energy use in your state. So if you're looking at it for California, awesome. And then you're also going to look at a couple of different states as well. So thank you so much for watching, and I appreciate you.